All right, let's get started. First of all, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Bob Fletcher. I'm CEO of the Ohio Association of Realtors. Thank you very much for being here. This is an important meeting, in my opinion. We're here to talk about some of the resources which are available to you at the local level and to the state level in terms of furthering our objectives in the public policy area. And it's an area which has never been more important than it is today. We are very fortunate today to have with us two very capable individuals, both of whom are currently employed by the National Association of Realtors. But before you hold that against them, they are very experienced, and they're experienced because they spent a lot of time, one of them at the local level with the association in the D.C. area, Washington, D.C. area, and the other with the State Association. The two ladies first. We have Meredith Weisel, right over here in the black dress. Some of you have met Meredith. Meredith is a consultant, a political consultant, specifically focusing on My Realtor Party, which is what this is all about. Meredith spent many years working with the D.C. Association, or a larger local board, so that's her perspective now, and we're delighted to have her with us. We also have, sitting right here, Bill Malkasian. Bill is from...
Last applause I'm going to get.
I don't think so. Bill is from the state of Wisconsin. I can tell you, I've known Bill ever since I started with OAR, which, believe it or not, is like 21 years ago. Bill has served, I think, you were a GAD at one point in time.
Many centuries
if I remember correctly. But he until recently, was with the Wisconsin Association of Realtors, serving many of his 30-plus years as the CEO of that state association. I can tell you right from the beginning, Wisconsin, just the effort they put into political affairs and government affairs and the way they do it, they're very sophisticated. They have been for a long, long time. And his perspective is from the state association. So we're delighted to have both of you here with us, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having us. Just a minor correction here. Meredith is not actually employed by NER. She's still a local GAD and affiliated with her association. So she's on contract with the National Association of Realtors, which we'll talk about in a minute. She's also going to present some of the programming here that we have. I, unfortunately, am $40 bill. So I get to go around the country and sort of have the confession statement of what we did right and what we did wrong. And so let me start with this after Fletcher's introduction. How many of you are realtors? Okay, there'll be times where I'm going to ask you to cover your ears. Okay. How many of you are AEs? I'll never ask you to cover your ears. How many of you are GADs? Okay, super. And I'm going to be calling on Gab a little because we actually did one of the programs here in a test case last summer. My background very quickly is that, as Fletch says, I ran the Wisconsin Association for 35 years. I was the CEO of that organization. Bud Smith was my mentor. In fact, the last time I was here was actually when Bud was here. Of course, knew Don Friels, knew Fletch, and the Ohio Association was part of the Great Lakes Caucus. So knew a lot of folks here. So to me, this is like a homecoming coming back to the Midwest. So in October of this year, actually this summer, Dale Stinton came to me, and I was going to actually retire in 2013 anyway. And Dale came to me and said, "We're rolling out the My Realtor Party. You know all about it." Said, "Would you come on board and be based out of the D.C. office?" So I still live in Madison, and help roll out the program. So my primary function is to work with the states and the boards and take this monster thing that we created and try to put some common sense to it and get it to the ground level of the boards of the states. The presentation today is really going to be interactive. I don't have, we'll use the website a couple times today, but I'm not the type that has 73 PowerPoints. that throws up 6 words, explain, 6 words, explain. I like to sort of walk around and get questions from you. And the beginning part of this and how we're really going to look at the agenda, if you look at the agenda today, we're going to talk a lot. It's probably going to take us some time in the beginning to sort of go through the program itself and its background and what it's all about. Because I have one mission. The mission I have is that the majority of you, hopefully all, could actually walk out of this room this afternoon, if we make it to 3, maybe earlier, and be able to go back to an agent or a broker and explain what the 40 bucks was for. I'll be happy. It's taken me 5 months to try to figure it out. And I am, just so you know, this is full confession. Mo Beasy knows this, Dale knows this, Walt Wittick knows this, Steve Brown knows this, that when I was running Wisconsin and this got passed, never really understood a lot of it. We didn't use a lot of these programs we're going to talk about. And as much as I love Kathy Watley and the PAG and everything else, they did as much as they could do, trying to take this huge thing and try to like sell it and create an immediacy to it and an importance to it. And it just, when I go around the country, and I've been to over 20 states, it just sometimes hasn't clicked. So my job is just in the beginning is to sort of talk a little about what it's all about. Because I think I've got a handle on what it's about. So that sort of goes. Second thing is from the perspective of being a state person and having 24, 25 boards in Wisconsin, and we were very close, the A's, the GADs, just for the realtors state. I'd like to be able to, we'll talk a lot about the campaign stuff, the and all that other stuff, but I'm practical enough to realize that very few boards of realtors around the entire country currently do some of the things we're going to talk about. And that's going to be a whole message in itself. However, there is a lot of this program, which is community-based stuff, grants and everything else, that you could do right now. And the other goal I have is to, for many of you in the room here is, if you're a board of 100 people, 500 people, 300, 400, how can you get 7, 8 grand back this year, without having to do any political stuff at all? So you can at least show some value of what the program is about. And we'll sort of talk a little about how you can get some money back. I guess what I'd like to do, though, before I start, you've all given us a day. Is there an expectation that you have today that I need to know about and Meredith needs to know about? You know, it's sort of like, what's the program? How do you get some money? Is there something else that is on your mind? Because I really believe in the beginning, if we have that dialogue back and forth and talk a little about the program itself and how it works, we can then get to the fun part about all the mechanics. When you're driving here today, you said I took a day out of the office. Anything else that's on your mind that maybe that I haven't mentioned? Because I want to make sure I cover everything. What's for lunch? What time is lunch? And again, this is going to be very informal, even though we're set up in a classroom scenario, and I want to thank Deb and everybody else for putting this together. We are very informal, and if you got a phone call and you got to take, the restrooms are out the door here, you want to get a cup of coffee, just get up and do it. If that's all right. Yeah.
My hope as a local president to be able to leave today with a basic structure, to be able to hand someone who's a member and say, this is the basics. We can go into detail if you want, but this is the basics.
Okay. Okay. And when you say basics, are you talking about the programs or the structure within the board to implement them? Combination of both. All right. And I tell you that as we walk through the program, what I typically do is I'll try to reference back within your local association who could do some of this stuff, or if you don't have it, what maybe you have to do. And one thing you'll hear a little later is you're very lucky because you have sort of a little unregulated world in the area of independent expenditures. And so one of the things I've asked Meredith and Paul and others to just verify for me in flesh is that because your law is fairly open-ended, you're not going to have to deal with all these affidavits. And I'm going to ask Gavin a little later to talk about when they were involved with their common council races and other things, what they did and how they did it locally for you so you understand it. That is a huge plus. As you get into that program, you'll understand that. What else? Structure, implementation, anything else that anybody has that they want to make sure we cover? Okay, let me start out and just give you sort of the little history lesson. And I cannot describe this entire program unless I give you just a few minutes of NAR and a little history and what it's all about, and then get into some political programming and explain where some of the issues are. And I have to tell you, these are things that I've learned in the last 4 or 5 months. One of the things that NAR stands for and believes in is really sort of representing property owners and doing advocacy stuff. Okay? I believe in the beginning where this thing sort of broke down from a communication standpoint is that if you're a local board or a realtor or whatever, and doing advocacy and elections and political stuff and issues and all that other stuff, you didn't do that in your local board, and you didn't care to do it, that wasn't your function, there was a terrible disconnect with this program. Because that's really what this program is all about. You know, it's $40 million of money. Think of it this way, it's 1,010,000 members, and that's where they got their money. About 35 million of it is allocated, about 5 million is still sort of unallocated. About 26 million of it is supposed to go back to local boards and state associations. Well, you're going to hear me say factoid number 1, myth number 2. The first myth was 2/3 of the money is supposed to go back to the locals and the states. Now, when I first heard that in Dallas last year at the AEI seminar, my first reaction was, I'm going to get a check. Take $40 times 500 members, 2/3 of it comes back, and tell you when I was in a wonderful southern state, a wonderful EO came up to me and said, I have budgeted the NAR contribution for next year. Would you tell me how much it is? I'm on a January 1 fiscal year. And I said, I don't think we did a good job selling this stuff. The point is, and you'll hear a little later, when we say 2/3 of the money are going back, the only amount of money that is actually allocated for the state of Ohio and the local boards is the IE money. And we'll show you the little chart. We'll show you the exact amount. All the rest of this program, you guys, and I apologize for the pillar over here because I'm going to miss some of you over here. I'm going to try to walk back and forth. There's also a camera going. So all of the rest of the money you have to apply for, and we're going to talk about all the programs. But in retrospect, it really comes down to this. There's about $26 million. About $7 million of it's on issues. About $7 million is on campaign services. About $7 million is independent expenditure money. And the rest are community services and things that we're going to talk about. So think of it, start out this way. If you're not going to do independent expenditures, and you're not going to do issues mobilization, and you're not going to do campaign services, we're already 3/4 out of the box in trouble. Because the only thing that's left are the community grants and programs. And I think that was myth number 2. Myth number 2 was this thing is going to be so supercharged that our members are going to see something so different that it's going to be revolutionary. And so when I go around the country, here's another thing I get is, where is the real estate super PAC? The super PACs are sort of in the newspaper right now. Did we create one? Well, ironically, let me tell you that last Friday we actually had a meeting, which is actually part of this original report, to explore the idea of creating a super PAC for real estate. That's for like people who were sympathetic to housing and they would give to this thing like the Lowe's and all the rest of it. That's not even part of this. Okay? Then the other myth that came out is that when the GADs and the AEs who really get into this stuff opened up the packet and they saw 45 programs, 44 of them were the same. And somebody called me and said, where's all the new programs for the $40? Well, the only new program out of this entire My Realtor Party is the independent expenditure program. The other programs are sort of like now on steroids. They have more money. And I'll historically go through those just to show you. Meaning there's more money to make available for 1,400 local boards in 50 states. So starting out with this thing, the whole concept of something's new and revolutionary, I will explain what that is. because we're going to do a little history lesson right now. Because I think I now understand the most important point before we even start anywhere. And let me give you the history lesson. 1969-70. Fletch had a lot of hair, even more than he's got now. I had more hair. It was the Doors. It was a great time. For us who weren't part of organized real estate yet, it was the beginning of something, and this is a very important point. I'm going to go back to this over and over again because it's the most compelling way to sell this program. In 1969-70, we created REPAC, which is now RPAC. Everybody know what RPAC is? Of course we know what RPAC is. We had nothing before that. Organized real estate had nothing. We created a political action committee, and here's a really important point, you guys. We created it with using hard money. Now the GADs in the room, most of the AEs probably know it, but hard money is anything not corporate money. It's individual money. And this is an extremely important point. So hard money was a personal check that somebody would have to write out to RPAC that competed against, you know, the grocery bill, the car payment, the mortgage. We had to ask our members only to write an RPAC check. Our original goal in 1969-70 was $50,000 for the whole country. We've got local boards that do $100,000 today, the big ones. What's the point? What's he yipping about? The point is that the environment at that time, the courts and the unions who had big PACs, somewhere in the bowels of NAR, the leadership said, if we don't have a PAC, we're not going to be competitive to elect people who are sympathetic to real estate. And it primarily started out at the federal level, then it became split between the locals and the states. And fast forward 45 years, we now have the largest business PAC in the country. So the message here is we're really good at raising hard money, PAC money. Okay? Well, now we're going to fast forward a little into the 70s, and we got into issues mobilization. Okay? It's another thing we're going to talk about. Issues mobilization. That's where you use money to influence the public about an issue. A sign ordinance, it could be a ballot initiative at the state level, but you use this money to influence people's voting decisions on issues. Our first issues mobilization total budget was $75,000. Today it's $7 million. Okay? Fast forward now into the 80s and the 90s, and we started to experiment with independent expenditures, IEs. These are expenditures that technically are used without the consent and knowledge of the candidate. So you would create something, you'd go do all this stuff for the candidate, and you wouldn't tell them, though, that you were doing all of this. And in your state, we'll explain a little later, it's very loose, but in most states, it's pretty tight stuff. Budget for that was probably under $100,000. Today it's $7 million. So this is NAR now. Okay? Fast forward now into the 2000s, and all of a sudden NAR says, you know, the most important thing we have as an organization is grassroots. What's grassroots? Grassroots is people. At the time when we peaked, we had about 1.4 million people. Today we've got about 1 million people. You hear it all the time. We got 1 million members, March the Hill, blah, 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 a realtor in every town. Well, it's interesting historically, and I know you're probably looking at me a little and going, you know, he's going off on a tangent, but this will lead up to everything. Grassroots is the root of everything that we do. And the history lesson, and I did this for the first time with Meredith in New York, is I went back and I looked up the NAR archives of what NAR did with grassroots. You ready for this? 1913, Congress passed an income tax. NAR, which was created in 1908 with 120 people and 19 boards of realtors in one state. You know what they did in 1913? They lobbied Congress through grassroots to eliminate a tax on rents because a lot of our members were landlords. 1920, they created the mortgage interest deduction. 1946, they eliminated what was called a flipping tax. because all the Army people were coming back and they were selling houses, they got rid of that. 1952, they created a capital gains exemption. Okay? 1972, they defined independent contractor status for realtors. 2001, 2002, they did healthcare reform. 2005, 6, they did banks. My point is, they did all of this with lots of people. So we're really good at grassroots stuff. Well, now back to my story. We're now at 2005 or so. We're at the peak of NER's size. 1.4 million. We sold the home store. Everybody remember home store? We sold the home store stock, made 80 million bucks, took 30 million of it and put it into a strategic reserve. That's where Century Lock came out of and everything like that. Well, some of that strategic reserve was used to create this, the Realtor Party. And the Realtor Party was created about 2005, 6, somewhere in that time frame, because they came up with the conclusion is that we're not D's or we're not R's. We're here to represent property owners and real estate, issues, property rights. Because the first question I always get going around the country is, who are we supporting for President of the United States? And the answer is Zippo. Because you can barely get your board of realtors to agree on a mayor. Now imagine what it is like with whatever.